Power to Change, a thinking gospel, brought to you by your host, Reverend James McRussell Lamb. And now, Pastor Lamb.
This is James McRussell Lamb with the Power to Change, brought to you by Lamb of God Ministries. And we have been sharing with you information about African history, a glorious and proud history which many are unaware of. Many times when we go to the movies, we don't realize that people are making fun of our history. You take the movie The Mummy, where they have people walking around like they're insane, saying, Amenhotep, Amenhotep. Well, we're going to look at some information today about Amenhotep that will certainly make you proud of who you are. Now, we're also going to be looking at some information regarding a movie that came out called Shawshank Redemption. I'm sure you've seen that movie. It's been on I don't know how many times, and there's a scene in the movie where a gentleman picks up a book and he says, who is this Alexander? And I can't say the name over the radio, but really he's talking about Alexander Dumas. And Alexander Dumas is a black man who lived in France, who wrote the book The Man in the Iron Mask, The Count of Monte Cristo, and The Three Musketeers. So how many times have you seen that and not realized that these were our scholars and our historians and those who have written glorious works? If you're an African American, or if not, if you have not gotten a hold of Hidden Colors 1 and 2, you need to get a hold and get yourself a copy of Hidden Colors. You can get it at Pyramid Bookstore along with my book here in the city of Little Rock. But we want to talk about some of the things that are in our history. Now, Pythagorean mathematics, the theory of the 4 elements of Thales of Miletus, Epicurean materialism, Platonic idealism, Judaism, Islam, modern science, history are all rooted in Egyptian cosmology and science. Yes, I'm often amazed when I look into our African history and I see the real image of what God wanted. You can't see the copy until you see the original. And don't forget, it's the copy who told you Pharaoh was a bad man. And despite all of that documented history, Greece is held up and considered the foundation of Western architecture, science, and knowledge. But factually and historically, it was in Africa first. Greece slowly became a nation starting in about 1000 BC, and Rome later developed beginning in about 600 to 700 BC. Europe was still inhabited by scattered communities of Stone Age hunters during the time of the pyramids in Egypt. African architecture was copied because it was built in 1500 to 1300 BC, long before Europeans started copying it. The Greeks and the Romans copied architecture from the Africans. There's no doubt about it. For thousands of years before the introduction of Christianity, the ancient world looked to Egypt as the foundation of spiritual wisdom and knowledge. Amenhotep was called the god of medicine, the prince of peace, and a type of Christ. Amenhotep was revered as a healer from approximately 2850 BC to 525 BC. Even kings and queens reveled in his glory. Amenhotep lived during the 3rd dynasty at the court of King Dozer. Amenhotep was a known scribe, chief lecturer, priest, architect, astronomer, and magician. In Kemetic medicine and magic, they were used together. What we would consider a miracle was something they took as an everyday practice. For 3,000 years, he was almost worshipped as a god in Greece and in Rome. Early Christians worshipped him as the Prince of Peace. I bet you didn't know that, did you? Amenhotep was also a poet and a philosopher. He was a multi-genius. When we look at Aristotle and Socrates and Plato and all these others that have been lifted up before us, Before they emerged out of Africa rose this multi-genius. He urged contentment and peace and cheerfulness. His proverbs contained a philosophy of life. Amenhotep coined the phrase saying, "Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we shall die." When the Egyptians crossed the Mediterranean, becoming the foundation of Greek culture, Amenhotep's teachings were absorbed there. Yet, as the Greeks were determined to assert that they were the originators of everything, Amenhotep was forgotten for thousands of years, and a legendary figure, Hippocrates, became 2,000 years later after him known as the father of medicine. But Sir William Osler, the best-known physician in the English-speaking world at the turn of the century, says that it is Amenhotep who was the real father of medicine. He said the first figure of a physician to stand out clearly from the mists of antiquity was Amenhotep. Amenhotep diagnosed and treated over 200 diseases, 15 diseases of the abdomen, 11 of the bladder, 10 of the rectum, 29 of the eyes, and 18 of the skin, hair, nails, and tongue. Amenhotep treated tuberculosis, gallstones, appendicitis, gout, and arthritis. Now, these are in written records that are still studied today in medical schools around the world. The Encyclopedia Britannica says that the evidence afforded by Egyptians and Greek texts, in other words, it was written down, support the view that Amenhotep's reputation was really very well respected in early times. His prestige increased with the lapse of centuries, and his temples in the Greek times were the centers of medical teachings. You see, at one time we were revered and looked up to, but now we have a fear of looking at our own history because some other group of people told us, don't go there, don't look at that, don't look at that history. Remember, when you're looking at the collection of books called the Bible, you are looking at somebody else's version of history. And it's high time that we look at our own history because it is so glorious and so powerful what we have given the world. But seems as if today we're so afraid to look at ourselves, so afraid to look at our own history. We've been taught to be afraid of who we actually are. When you hear the word African or when you hear the word Egyptian, we run from that. But we ought to embrace who we are so that other people can see who we are. Not only that, but that we know who we are and we can stand without fear in the presence of others. Fear is a very natural and normal response to the challenges we face in life. Fear tells us that something we must be cautious about. Fear puts us on alert and tells us there's something that we must be prepared for. Fear means something we know nothing about is about to come upon us. Fear of change, fear of the unknown, fear of rejection, fear of failure and success are like the barking of a ferocious bulldog. For people of color, the fear of being bitten again immobilizes us. The fear of our own history, a history that has not been honored, our sense of worth and value supports that fear. The way we view it supports that fear. The best thing we can do is overcome that fear by confronting it, by looking at our own history, by recognizing our own greatness, yes, even in the biblical text, by looking at the biblical text. When you take the color out of the Bible, then you can't understand how great we are. Yes, when the centurion looked at the Apostle Paul, he said, "Aren't you an Egyptian?" Now, when he said, "Aren't you an Egyptian?" he was looking at him. And make no mistake about it, Egyptians were black people. So here you have almost the entire New Testament written by an African-looking individual who was a Hebrew, but he looked just like an African. So in essence, you have most of the New Testament written by a man who looked just like an African. So there are so many things that the ancient African Egyptians did. They participated in a variety of physical activities: running, hunting, fowling, fishing, boating, swimming, sailing, rowing, yachting, boxing, stick fencing, chariot racing, dancing, wrestling, acrobatic exercises, ball and board games. Chess came out of Africa. Most of the physical activities were practiced for fun and enjoyment. However, some had religious and political significance. You see, when you can't see yourself and how great you are, then you walk around with the indoctrination that you were nothing, that you were a savage taken out of Africa. That's what people want you to believe about yourself. They don't want you to know how great you are. They don't want you to be able to walk around with your chest stuck out. You need to know who you are. For example, some of the things that happened in Egypt were dance was a ritual expression as well as a societal activity practiced by children, women, and men. Dance was usually accompanied by music, clapping, and singing. It was generally performed to entertain guests at social parties, to celebrate different occasions, to accompany rituals, and to bring joy to the deceased. You see, Pharaoh didn't live in a tent somewhere out in the middle of a desert. He lived in a great palace. He had statesmen and diplomats from all over the then known world who came there. Africa was the richest continent on the face of the earth. And it still is, but we are still today being exploited because we do not know our own history. We don't know how great we are, and we don't have a sense of nationhood. All of these basketball players that make all of this money, and 4 years later they're broke. If they had a sense of nationhood, they would create a school, they would leave a legacy, they would do something to support the Africans here in America. And I'm not against America. I'm not against any group. I don't hate anybody, but I sure love me some us. I love the way God made us, and I'm not ashamed of it. I'm not ashamed of the gospel, the truth of Jesus Christ, because it is the power of God unto salvation. It is the knowledge that saved me, and we need to go beyond the books that we were given to recite from, to realize that we have the potential and the energy and the power to create a nation within this nation that others would be proud of. It is our lack of nationhood, our irresponsibility to our brothers and sisters, our separation through looking at one another through various religious lenses, and an inability to see one another as brothers and sisters that will enable us to come together based on what they have been destroying us with, our own color. When we come to, and there's nothing wrong with that. People do it all over the world. They come together based on their own history and who they are and their own understanding of who they are in the world. There's nothing wrong with coming together like that. But we have been taught there's something wrong with that. A black cat, black magic, black food is devil food cake. White food is angel food cake. All these things. You get a black eye. All the pot calling the kettle black. We even do it to ourselves when we're growing up. If you're black, stay back. If you're brown, stick around. If you're white, you're all right. If you're yellow, you're mellow. We do it to ourselves. We have been programmed to act the way we act. And it is time for the liberating power of the gospel, the liberating power of God's eminent domain to be able to reach into the depths of our soul and our subconscious and to clarify all of that negative programming so that we recognize that we are the mothers and fathers of the planet, that all nations flowed out of us, that God created us first in Africa, and all nations flow out from us. They have our blood in them. God bless you, and I hope you appreciate this Black History. We're having our last session next month. And then we're going back into explaining the magnificent creation of you, all of the gifts and the talents that you were born with, your mind, your brain, your vision, your imagination, your knowledge, your memory, your conscience, subconscious, habit, force, and heart. We're going back into the exploration of that so that you can use your knowledge to be able to create a whole new vision for yourself, your family, and your community. Until next week, God bless you, and may the power of the Almighty be with you.